The mahogany boardroom table stretched before me like a vast ocean of polished wood, its surface so perfectly reflective that I could see my own face staring back at me, a face that had weathered 25 years of doubt, struggle, and eventual triumph. The room was filled with executives in their tailored suits, their expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility as they awaited my first words as their new owner. The air was thick with tension, a palpable energy that seemed to crackle between the expensive leather chairs and the panoramic windows overlooking the city skyline. 25 years ago, I had been the family disappointment, the college dropout they whispered about at holiday gatherings, the one who couldn't hold a steady job or finish what he started. Today, I was acquiring Sterling Enterprises, the very company my older brother had built his career at, the same brother who had looked me in the eye and told me I'd never amount to anything. As I stood at the head of this massive table, my fingers tracing the polished wood, I could feel the weight of those 25 years pressing down on me not as a burden, but as a foundation that had built me into who I had become. The executives shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their expensive rustling like autumn leaves in a sudden wind. I recognized some of them from company photos I had studied during the acquisition process, faces that had once seemed distant and untouchable, now looking to me for guidance and direction. Among them sat Michael, my brother, his face a mask of carefully controlled emotion that couldn't quite hide the disbelief and perhaps even a flicker of fear in his eyes. His silver-streaked hair was perfectly styled, his tailored suit immaculate. But there was a weariness in his posture that hadn't been there in the photographs I had seen over the years. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on me. The brother who had built his entire career at Sterling now sat as an employee, waiting to hear what the college dropout brother had to say about the future of the company. As I looked around at the stunned faces of the executives who had once dismissed me, my mind drifted back to the exact moment my journey began the night. I decided to stop drifting and start living with definiteness. The memory was so vivid, so immediate, that for a moment I could almost smell the burnt sugar from the creme brulee my mother had made that night. Could almost feel the cold marble of the kitchen countertop against my back as Michael cornered me with his condescending smile. If you've ever been underestimated, belittled, or counted out by people who should have believed in you, then you understand the fire that began burning in my soul that night. It's a fire that can either consume you or forge you into something stronger. I chose the latter, and today, I'm sharing how I turned 25 years of doubt into the most satisfying revenge you could imagine, not through destruction, but through transformation. It started at a family dinner that still makes my hands clench when I think about it. Even after all these years, the air in my parents' dining room was thick with unspoken judgments, and the scent of my mother's famous roast, something that had once brought me comfort but now felt like part of an inquisition. The dining room was my mother's domain, decorated with the careful attention to detail that characterized everything she did. The crystal glasses caught the light from the chandelier overhead, casting tiny rainbows across the white tablecloth. Silverware gleamed, polished to a mirror finish, and the centerpiece arrangement of autumn flowers my mother had put together that morning seemed to mock me with its perfection. I was 22, having just dropped out of college to pursue what I called my business ideas, though at that point they were little more than scattered concepts without focus or execution. Throughout dinner, I could feel the weight of my family's disappointment pressing down on me, their unspoken questions hanging in the air like storm clouds. My father would occasionally glance at me with that look of concern mixed with disappointment that had become his default expression whenever he looked at me since I'd left college. My mother tried to maintain a cheerful facade, but even she couldn't completely hide her worry. My brother Michael, 2 years older and already climbing the corporate ladder at Sterling Enterprises, had cornered me in the kitchen after dinner. The kitchen was my mother's sanctuary, space that always smelled of vanilla and cinnamon, where she would spend hours creating culinary masterpieces. Tonight, however, it felt more like an interrogation room than a comforting space. The smell of burnt sugar from the creme brulee still lingered in the air as he leaned against the marble countertop, his expensive suit perfectly pressed, his condescending smile firmly in place. He had that look, the one that said he had already won at life and was merely tolerating my presence in his world. His cufflinks glinted under the kitchen's recessed lighting, Small gold monograms that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Everything about Michael screamed success and stability. Everything I was not at that moment in my life. "So, little brother, still chasing those business ideas?" Michael had asked, making air quotes with his fingers, as if the very concept of me having legitimate business aspirations was laughable. "Mom and Dad are worried about you. We all are. You had a full scholarship to a good university, and you threw it away too, ... What exactly? Sell some cheap products online?" His voice was laced with that special kind of condescension that only family can deliver, a mixture of concern and contempt that cuts deeper than any stranger's criticism could. I could see our reflection in the polished surface of the kitchen appliances, him, tall and confident.
Oh.
Me, looking smaller somehow. My shoulders slumped despite my attempts to appear unaffected by his words. I remember my face growing hot, a flush of shame and anger creeping up my neck. My hands trembled slightly as I dried a dish, the ceramic cool against my skin. "It's called e-commerce, Michael, and it's going to be bigger than traditional retail someday." Even as I said the words, I lacked the conviction to make them sound like anything more than wishful thinking. The truth was, I wasn't entirely sure what I was doing. I had ideas, yes, but no clear plan. I had dropped out of college because I felt like I was learning things that would be obsolete by the time I graduated. But I hadn't yet found the path that would replace the traditional route I had abandoned. My words sounded hollow even to my own ears, and I could see that Michael recognized my uncertainty immediately. He laughed, a sharp, cutting laugh that had always made me feel small since we were children. "That's cute, really. But some of us live in the real world. I just got promoted to regional manager at Sterling. They're talking about fast-tracking me to VP within 5 years. That's success. Not playing around on the internet." As he spoke, he straightened his tie, a gesture that seemed to emphasize his status and my lack thereof. He looked at me with a mixture of pity and contempt, as if I were a child who still believed in Santa Claus while he had long since moved on to adult realities. The kitchen suddenly felt smaller, the air thicker, as if his confidence were physically pushing against me, trying to force me into a corner. The kitchen door swung open, and our father walked in, his expression disappointed as he looked at me. At 62, with silver hair at his temples and a face lined with worry, he carried the weight of parental concern like a heavy coat. He had always been the stoic type, not one to show emotion openly. But his disappointment in me was evident in the slight downturn of his mouth, the furrow between his brows. "Michael's right, son. This business fantasy of yours, ... It's time to get serious. We're not asking much. Just finish your degree. Get a real job like your brother." His voice was gentle, but the words struck me with the force of a physical blow. I had always looked up to my father, had always wanted to make him proud, but somehow, I always seemed to fall short of his expectations. Michael, on the other hand, had always been the golden child, the one who followed the path our parents had laid out for us. I could feel the walls closing in, their words pressing down on me like a physical weight. My chest tightened, and I struggled to breathe, as if the very air in the room had become too thick to inhale. The perfect orderliness of the kitchen suddenly felt suffocating, the neatly arranged spices, the color-coded towels, the gleaming appliances, all seemed to mock my lack of direction. "You don't understand. This is what I meant to do." The words came out as a whisper, barely audible even in the small space of the kitchen. I wanted to sound confident to make them understand my vision, but all I could feel was the crushing weight of their judgment. "What you're meant to do is stop embarrassing this family," Michael shot back, his voice rising with each word. "Do you know how many questions I had to answer at the company picnic when people asked what my brother was doing? Oh, he's taking time to find himself. That's what I told them. The truth is, you're drifting through life with no direction, no purpose." His words hit their mark, each one like a carefully aimed dart finding its target. I could see the frustration in his eyes, the genuine embarrassment he felt about having to explain my life choices to his colleagues and superiors. In that moment, I wasn't just his brother. I was a liability, an embarrassment to his carefully constructed image of success. That word, drifting it, hit me like a punch to the gut. Because in that moment, I knew he was right. I had ideas, yes, but no focus, no definiteness. I was floating from one concept to another, never committing fully to any of them. I was a ship without a rudder, tossed about by the currents of indecision and half-hearted attempts at entrepreneurship. The realization washed over me like a cold wave, leaving me feeling exposed and vulnerable. All this time, I'd been telling myself that I was forging my own path, thinking outside the box. But the truth was, I was lost. I had abandoned the traditional path without finding a new one to follow. "I'll show you," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, the words feeling inadequate even to my own ears. "One day you'll see." It was a weak response, the kind of desperate promise someone makes when they have nothing else to offer. I wanted to sound confident, to make them believe in me, but the words came out sounding hollow and defensive. Michael just shook his head, patting me on the shoulder with a gesture that felt more like a shove than a display of brotherly affection. "Sure you will, little brother. Sure you will." The condescension in his voice was unmistakable, as if he were humoring a child who had just declared they would one day fly to the moon. As he turned and walked away, I was left alone in the kitchen, surrounded by the perfect orderliness that seemed to highlight the chaos of my own life. The reflection in the microwave door showed a young man with slumped shoulders and a defeated expression, and for the first time, I saw myself through their eyes of disappointment. A failure, someone who was indeed drifting through life with no direction. That night, lying on the lumpy cot in my tiny apartment, the fluorescent light of the 24-hour diner across the street casting eerie shadows on my ceiling, I made a decision. Not a wish, not a hope, but a spiritual command that would change the course of my life forever. I would no longer drift. I would become a man of definiteness. The apartment was a reflection of my life at that point, small, cramped, and filled with unfinished projects. Half-written business plans littered the desk, books on entrepreneurship, with pages marked but never fully absorbed, and a collection of domain names for websites that had never been launched. I was surrounded by the remnants of good intentions without the follow-through to give them life. The walls were painted a depressing shade of beige that had probably been white when I moved in, but had yellowed with age and cigarette smoke from previous tenants. The single window looked out onto a brick wall, offering no view of the sky or street. Just a constant reminder of the limitations of my current circumstances. As I stared at the water-stained ceiling, Michael's words echoed in my mind, drifting through life with no direction, no purpose. The truth of his assessment stung more than I cared to admit. I had been floating from one idea to another without ever committing fully to any of them. I had the passion but lacked the focus. I had the ambition but lacked the direction. The cot beneath me creaked with every movement, the springs worn from years of use. The thin blanket provided little warmth against the chill of the night. But I barely noticed the physical discomfort as I wrestled with the uncomfortable truth about myself. I had always prided myself on being different from Michael, on not following the conventional path. But now I realized that I had simply replaced one form of aimlessness with another. Something shifted inside me that night, a resolve so powerful it felt almost physical. I sat up, my heart pounding with a new energy, a new determination. I walked to the small desk beneath the window, pushing aside the scattered papers and half-empty coffee cups to make space for a single clean sheet of paper. The desk was covered. In the debris of my unfinished projects, business cards from networking events I had attended, notes from webinars I had started but never finished, receipts for online courses I had purchased but never completed. As I cleared a space, I was literally clearing away the clutter of my drifting past to make room for a focused future. The next morning, I woke before dawn, the city still asleep outside my window. The pre-dawn light cast a soft glow across the room as I sat at my desk, pen in hand. I took out a clean sheet of paper and wrote at the top what I demand from myself, not what I hoped for, not what I preferred. But what I demanded. There was a power in that choice of words that resonated deep within me. The word demand. Implied authority, control, a refusal to accept anything less than what I specified. It was the language of someone who took responsibility for their life rather than waiting. for circumstances to improve. The first item: I will build a business that revolutionizes e-commerce. The second: I will achieve financial independence by age 30. The third: I will prove to everyone who doubted me that they were wrong. These weren't just goals. They were declarations, commitments to myself that I would not break. As I wrote each item, I felt a surge of energy, a sense of purpose that had been missing from my life. The ink flowed from the pen, dark and permanent on the white paper, symbolizing the permanence of my decision. I wasn't making suggestions to myself. I was issuing commands that would shape my future. For the next 6 months, I worked with a focus I'd never known. I transformed my small apartment into a command center for my new life. I created a strict schedule, waking at 5 a.m. every day without fail, exercising for 30 minutes, then dedicating the first 2 hours of my day to reading books, studying successful companies, analyzing market trends. The apartment began to change as I changed. The scattered papers were organized into neat files. The half-empty coffee cups were replaced with a single mug that I washed each morning. The unfinished projects were either completed or discarded, making room for the one thing that would become my focus. The walls, once bare, except for the water stains, were soon covered with charts, graphs, and timelines, visual representations of the path I had committed to follow. I devoured biographies of successful entrepreneurs like Edison, Ford, and Carnegie, not just for their achievements, but for their mindset. I discovered that success wasn't about talent or education or luck. It was about decision, definite decision. Edison didn't accidentally invent the light bulb. He decided he would create it and then refused to accept failure. Ford didn't stumble upon the assembly line. He decided there had to be a better way to produce automobiles and then found it. I filled notebook after notebook with insights from these visionaries, extracting the principles that had guided their success and adapting them to my own situation. The biographies became my textbooks, the stories of their determination, my inspiration. When I felt discouraged or tempted to return to my old patterns of drifting, I would read passages about their persistence, their refusal to accept limitations, their unwavering belief in their vision. I stopped chasing multiple ideas and focused on one: creating a platform that would make online shopping more intuitive and personalized. At the time, e-commerce was still in its infancy. Amazon was primarily a bookseller. eBay was just gaining traction, and most people were still wary of entering their credit card information online. But I saw the future where people would do more of their shopping online, where personalization would make the experience more efficient and enjoyable than traditional retail. I spent countless hours analyzing existing e-commerce platforms, identifying their weaknesses and envisioning how they could be improved. I drew diagrams of user interfaces, mapped out customer journeys, and created detailed specifications for the platform I would build. The more I worked on this idea, the more convinced I became that this was not just a business opportunity, but my calling, the thing I was meant to do. I spent months researching, planning, and developing my concept. I taught myself to code, taking online courses and practicing until the early hours of the morning. The glow of my computer screen became a constant companion in the small apartment, illuminating the focused intensity of my work. I reached out to anyone who might have expertise to share, facing rejection after rejection, but refusing to be deterred. Each no only strengthened my resolve. I sent hundreds of emails to potential mentors, attended every tech meet I could find, and spent hours in coffee shops working on my code while overhearing conversations about startups and funding rounds. Most people dismissed me as just another wannabe entrepreneur with a half-baked idea, but I didn't let their skepticism shake my certainty. I knew that success was inevitable, not because I was particularly talented or lucky, but because I had made a decision and was willing to pay whatever price was required to see it through. I launched my company, which I called Nexus, with my last $1,000. The name represented my vision, a central point connecting consumers with products they would love, based on their preferences and behaviors. I had found a small office space in a rundown part of town, a single room with a desk, a chair, and a window that looked out onto a brick wall. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a physical space dedicated to my vision. The office was on the third floor of a building that had seen better decades. The hallway smelled of mildew and neglect. The elevator was often out of service, and the other tenants seemed to be struggling artists or similarly fledgling entrepreneurs. The first year was brutal. Slept on a friend's couch, showered at the gym, and ate ramen noodles 3 meals a day. There were days when I wanted to quit, when Michael's voice echoed in my head, telling me I was a failure.
Ow.
But I had made a decision, and I refused to break faith with myself. The couch belonged to a college friend who had taken pity on me, offering his living room as long as I needed it. Each night, I would unroll the sleeping bag he had given me, trying to ignore the lumps and springs that made sleep difficult. Each morning, I would wake before my friend, fold my sleeping bag neatly, and head to the gym for a shower before beginning my workday. The ramen noodles became so familiar that I could tell the flavor just by the color of the seasoning packet. There were moments when the physical discomfort and emotional strain felt overwhelming, when I questioned whether I was being foolish or stubborn. But then I would remember the certainty I had felt when I wrote my demands, and I would push through. The doubt, focusing on the next task, the next step, toward my goal. I remember one particularly dark evening in December. 6 months after launching Nexus, I had just received my third rejection for a small business loan. My savings were nearly depleted. I was sitting in my small office, staring at a computer, screen filled with code that wouldn't work, when the weight of it all crashed down on me. The loneliness, the financial strain, the constant rejection, it all felt like too much to bear. The office was cold, the building's heating system inadequate against the winter chill. I could hear the wind whistling through the window frame. A constant reminder of the gaps in my defenses, both literal and figurative. The code on my screen seemed to mock me, line after line of errors that I couldn't resolve, despite hours of effort. In that moment, I felt utterly alone, a solitary figure in a dimly lit room, fighting a battle that seemed increasingly unwinnable. For a moment, I considered giving up. Maybe Michael was right. Maybe I was just drifting through life with no direction. But then I looked at the paper I had taped to the wall. What I demand from myself and the words I had written 6 months earlier. I had made a decision, and breaking faith with myself felt worse than any failure could. The words on the paper seemed to glow in the dim light of the office, each demand a reminder of the commitment I had made to myself. I had promised myself that I would build a revolutionary business, achieve financial independence, and prove my doubters wrong. Giving up now would mean breaking that promise, and the thought of that disappointment felt more painful than any of the struggles I was currently facing. I stood up, walked to the window, and looked out at the brick wall beyond the glass. "Will not quit," I said aloud, the words echoing in the small room. "I will not drift. I will not fail." Speaking the words aloud gave them power, made them more real somehow. The brick wall outside, which had once seemed like a symbol of my limitations, now became a backdrop for my declaration of intent. I wasn't just talking to myself. I was making a proclamation to the universe, to anyone or anything that might be listening. I was staking my claim on a future that I would create through sheer force of will. That night, it worked until 3 a.m., fixing the code that had been troubling me for days. When I finally saw the program run smoothly, a sense of triumph washed over me as small victory, but a victory nonetheless. It was a reminder that I had the power to solve problems, to overcome obstacles, to create something from nothing. The success of the code felt like a sign, a confirmation that I was on the right path despite the challenges. As I finally left the office that night, walking through the dark, empty streets to my friend's apartment, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. The exhaustion was still there, but it was now accompanied by a quiet confidence that I could indeed achieve what I had set out to do. The turning point came at a tech conference where I was demonstrating my prototype. I had scraped together enough money for a small booth in the startup section of the conference, tucked away between more established companies with flashy displays and professional staff. My booth consisted of a small table, a folding chair, and a laptop displaying my prototype. The conference was held in a massive convention center, filled with the latest technology and the brightest minds in the industry. As I set up my humble display, I couldn't help but feel out of place among the sleek, professional booths of more established companies. The startups around me had matching t-shirts, professional banners, and teams of people engaging with passersby. I had a hand-drawn sign and a laptop that occasionally overheated. For 2 days, I stood at that booth, demonstrating my platform to anyone who would stop to listen. Most people passed by with polite disinterest, some offering condescending advice about how I should get a real job or go back to school. But I persisted, fueled by the definiteness of my decision. I learned to quickly identify those who might be genuinely interested versus those who were just looking for free swag or passing the time. I refined my pitch with each conversation, learning to communicate the value of my platform more effectively. By the end of the second day, my voice was hoarse from talking, my feet ached from standing, and I had collected only a handful of business cards from people who seemed moderately interested. On the third day, a venture capitalist who had initially dismissed me returned to my booth 3 times, each time asking more detailed questions. His name was Robert Chen, a respected investor known for his sharp eye for promising startups. The first time he approached, he spent maybe 5 minutes at my booth before moving on with a polite but dismissive nod. The second time, he stayed for 15 minutes, his brow furrowed in concentration as I demonstrated features of my platform. On his third visit, he spent nearly an hour, asking increasingly technical questions about my algorithm, my business model, my vision for the future. Each time he returned, my heart beat a little faster, sensing that something significant might be happening. Finally, he looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read, part skepticism, part curiosity, part something else I couldn't identify. "There's something about your certainty," he said. "Most entrepreneurs are hesitant, uncertain. They hedge their bets, qualify their statements. You speak as if your success is already a fact." His observation caught me off guard. I hadn't realized how my internal certainty was manifesting in my external communication. But now that he mentioned it, I realized he was right. I wasn't hoping, or wishing, or trying. I was stating facts as I saw them. Facts that had not yet materialized in the physical world, but were already real in my mind. "It is," I replied. And in that moment, I realized I truly believed it. Not just hoped for it, not just worked toward it, but knew it with a certainty that permeated every cell of my being. The knowledge wasn't arrogant or boastful. It was simply a recognition of the inevitable outcome of my decision and the work I was willing to put in. Success wasn't a possibility. It was a certainty, just as night follows day. He nodded slowly, a small smile forming on his lips. "I'm going to take a chance on you," he said, pulling out a checkbook. "Not just because of your idea, which has merit, but because of your definiteness. That's something that can't be taught, and it's more valuable than any technical skill." As he wrote the check, I watched in a state of disbelief and exhilaration. The numbers he wrote, $250,000, represented more than money. Validation, recognition, and the resources to take my vision to the next level. He wrote me a check on the spot, $250,000, enough to move out of my friend's couch and hire my first 2 employees. As I held that check in my hands, I felt a surge of emotion so powerful it almost brought me to my knees. This was at the beginning of everything I had declared I would achieve. The paper felt light in my hands, but the weight of what it represented was immense. It was a tangible acknowledgement that my decision, my definiteness, had been recognized by someone with the power to help me realize my vision. As I walked away from his booth, check in hand, I felt as if I were walking on air. The noise of the conference fading into a distant hum as I focused on this pivotal moment in my journey. With Robert's investment, Nexus began to grow at an astonishing rate. Hired 2 brilliant programmers, Sarah, a recent graduate with a knack for algorithm development, and David, seasoned developer who had grown tired of the corporate world and was looking for something more meaningful. Together, we worked tirelessly to refine the platform, improve the user experience, and build the infrastructure needed to scale. Sarah was brilliant with code, but shy in person, her fingers flying across the keyboard with a speed that left me in awe. David, on the other hand, was a natural leader, able to translate complex technical concepts into language that business people could understand. The 3 of us formed a tight-knit team, working long hours fueled by coffee, pizza, and a shared vision for what Nexus could become. The first version of Nexus launched 6 months later, to modest but encouraging results. We had signed up 10,000 users in our first month, and while that was a drop in the ocean compared to industry giants, it validated our concept and gave us the momentum we needed to keep pushing forward. The launch day was both exhilarating and terrifying. We had worked around the clock for weeks to prepare, testing and retesting every aspect of the platform. When we finally flipped the switch, making Nexus live to the public, I felt a mixture of pride and anxiety. The first few hours were slow, with only a trickle of users signing up. But by the end of the first day, we had 100 users, and by the end of the first week, we had 1,000. Watching the numbers climb on our analytics dashboard was like watching a plant we had nurtured finally begin to sprout leaves. I moved out of my friend's couch and into a small apartment near the office, allowing me to work even longer hours. I slept on a mattress on the floor, ate most of my meals at my desk, and dedicated every waking moment to building Nexus. My life had been reduced to 3 things: sleep, food, and work. But I had never felt more alive. The apartment was sparsely furnished, a mattress on the floor, a small table that served as both a dining area and additional workspace, and a single bookshelf filled with technical manuals and business books. I had little time for anything outside of work, but I didn't feel deprived. Every line of code written, every feature implemented, every user acquired felt like a step toward the future I had declared for myself. Within 2 years, Nexus had grown to 50 employees and had secured a second round of funding, $5 million this time. Led by the same venture capital firm that had initially invested, we had moved to a larger office space in a better part of town, with actual desks and chairs and a conference room with a whiteboard where we could brainstorm and plan our next moves. The new office was on the 10th floor of a modern building with panoramic views of the city. It had glass-walled meeting rooms, a kitchen stocked with snacks and drinks, and ergonomic chairs that were a world away from the folding chair I had used in my first office. The growth of our physical space mirrored the growth of our team and our user base. We were no longer just 3 people working around the clock. We were a company with departments, processes, and a culture that was beginning to take shape. The media began to take notice. Tech blogs wrote about our innovative approach to e-commerce. Business magazines featured us in articles about up-and-coming startups. And I found myself being invited to speak at conferences and industry events. I was no longer the struggling entrepreneur with a dream. I was becoming a recognized figure in the tech world. The first time I saw my name in a major publication, I felt a surreal sense of disconnection, as if the person being written about was someone else entirely. But as the media attention continued, I began to grow more comfortable with my role as a spokesperson for Nexus and for the future of e-commerce. I learned to distill complex technical concepts into sound bites, to tell the story of Nexus in a way that resonated with journalists and their readers. But through all this success, I never forgot Michael's words that night in the kitchen. I never forgot the look on my father's face, and I never forgot the promise I had made to myself. These memories served as fuel, reminding me of how far I had come and how much further I still had to go. On difficult days, when we faced technical challenges or competitive pressures, I would recall the feeling of being dismissed, of being told I would never amount to anything. Those memories weren't bitter anymore. They had been transformed into motivation, a reminder of why I had started this journey in the first place. I kept a small framed copy of my "What I Demand from Myself" list on my desk, a daily reminder of the commitment that had set everything in motion. By 5 years after launching Nexus, we were valued at $50 million. We had expanded our team to over 200 employees, moved into a sleek, modern office in the heart of the city's tech district, and were processing millions of dollars in transactions each month. Our platform had evolved beyond my initial concept, incorporating artificial intelligence and machine learning to create an increasingly personalized shopping experience for our users. The office space reflected our success in our vision open-plan work areas that encouraged collaboration, quiet rooms for focused work, and common areas designed to foster the kind of informal interactions that often sparked our best ideas. The team had grown beyond just technical talent to include designers, marketers, customer support specialists, and business development professionals. Each new hire was carefully selected not just for their skills, but for their alignment with our culture of definiteness and innovation. I had also achieved financial independence, as I had demanded of myself in that list I had written all those years ago. I bought my first home, a modest but comfortable condo with a view of the city skyline. I no longer worried about paying bills or having enough money for groceries, but more importantly, I had the freedom to focus on what truly mattered, building Nexus into the company I had envisioned. The condo was in the same building as my office, allowing me to maintain the intense focus that had characterized my journey so far. It was furnished simply but elegantly, a few pieces of art on the walls, and a comfortable sofa where I could occasionally relax with a book. The view from the floor-to-ceiling windows showed the city I had come to know so well, a constant reminder of how far I had come from the days of sleeping on a friend's couch. At 10 years, Nexus was a household name. We had expanded internationally with offices in Europe, Asia, and South America. Our platform was used by millions of people around the world, and we had partnerships with thousands of retailers, from small businesses to global brands. We had revolutionized e-commerce, just as I had declared I would. The international expansion brought new challenges, cultural differences, regulatory complexities, and the need to adapt our platform to different markets and languages. But we approached these challenges with the same definiteness that had characterized our journey from the beginning. I traveled extensively, visiting each of our international offices and meeting with local teams and partners. These trips gave me a broader perspective on our impact and reinforced the universality of the need for more personalized, intuitive e-commerce experiences. At 15 years, we went public, and I found myself on the cover of Forbes magazine under the headline, "The E-commerce Visionary Who Changed How We Shop." I held that magazine in my hands. I thought back to that night in my tiny apartment, writing my demands on a sheet of paper. I had achieved everything I had set out to achieve, and yet there was still one thing left to do: prove to everyone who had doubted me that they were wrong. The IPO was a surreal experience, a culmination of years of hard work, sacrifice, and unwavering focus. Standing on the podium at the stock exchange, watching the ticker tape with our company's symbols scroll across the screen, I felt a profound sense of accomplishment. But even as I celebrated this milestone with my team, my thoughts drifted back to the beginning, to the promises I had made to myself in that small apartment. Years ago, the opportunity for what you might call my revenge came unexpectedly. Sterling Enterprises, the company where my brother had worked his way up to executive vice president, was struggling. They had failed to adapt to the changing retail landscape, and their stock was plummeting. Their board approached me about a potential acquisition. I remember the day I received the email from Sterling's board of directors. I was in my office reviewing quarterly reports with my executive team, when my assistant forwarded me a message marked confidential. The board was requesting a meeting to discuss a potential strategic partnership. Corporate speak for we're in trouble and need help. As I read the email, a complex mix of emotions washed over me. Part of me felt a surge of satisfaction. Michael, who had built his entire career at Sterling, was now part of a failing enterprise. But another part of me felt something else, pity perhaps, or at least a recognition of how quickly fortunes can change in the business world. I had followed Sterling's decline from a distance, noting their missed opportunities to embrace e-commerce, their failure to innovate, their reluctance to adapt to changing consumer preferences. What had once been a retail powerhouse was now struggling to remain relevant in a world they had failed to understand. I agreed to the meeting, curious to hear what they had to say and wondering if there might be an opportunity for Nexus. Sterling still had valuable assets, a network of physical stores, established relationships with suppliers, and a brand name that, while tarnished, still carried recognition in certain markets. The potential acquisition made business sense. Nexus had the technology and online expertise, while Sterling had the physical infrastructure and traditional retail experience. Together we could create a new kind of retail enterprise that combined the best of both worlds: The first meeting took place in a conference room at Sterling's headquarters. As I walked through the lobby, I couldn't help but remember the day Michael had proudly given me a tour of this very building, pointing out his corner office with the view of the city. Now, I was the one touring the building as a potential buyer. It's Michael and the other executives looking to me for a lifeline. The building itself seemed dated compared to our modern offices at Nexus. Dark wood paneling, heavy furniture, and a general atmosphere of tradition rather than innovation. The employees I passed in the hallways seemed to carry a weight of uncertainty, their expressions a mixture of hope and fear as they wondered about their future under new ownership. The meeting was tense, the board members trying to maintain an appearance of control. While clearly desperate for a solution to their mounting problems, they presented a rosy picture of Sterling's potential, downplaying the severity of their situation, but I could read between the lines. Their business model was outdated, their online presence was minimal, and their corporate culture was resistant to change. As they spoke, I found myself comparing their approach to business with the definiteness that had driven Nexus's success. Where we had embraced change and disruption, they had clung to traditional methods. Where we had focused on innovation and customer experience, they had prioritized maintaining the status quo. Michael was there, sitting at the table with the other executives. He had aged since I had last seen him at a family gathering a few years earlier. There were lines around his eyes, and a weariness in his posture that hadn't been there before. When our eyes met across the table, I saw a flicker of something shame, perhaps, or at least recognition of how our positions had reversed. He was dressed in the same kind of expensive suit he had always worn, but it no longer seemed to convey the same authority it once had. His shoulders were slightly slumped, his confidence visibly shaken by the predicament his company found itself in. "The retail landscape has changed," I said, choosing my words carefully. "Traditional brick-and-mortar stores are struggling, and online shopping continues to grow. Sterling has valuable assets, but they need to be integrated with a strong e-commerce platform to remain competitive." As I spoke, I could feel the weight of my position, the power to determine the future of the company that had once represented everything my family had valued in terms of career success. I spoke not with arrogance, but with the authority that comes from having built something from nothing. From having navigated the changing landscape of retail successfully, while Sterling had floundered, the board members nodded in agreement, their expressions a mixture of relief and apprehension. They knew I was right, but they also knew what it meant. Sterling, in its current form, was not viable. The chairman of the board, an older man with a silver mustache and a tailored suit that couldn't quite hide his desperation, cleared his throat before speaking. "We believe a partnership with Nexus could be mutually beneficial," he said. "We have the physical infrastructure and supplier relationships. You have the technology and online presence." His voice was steady, but I could see the tension in his jaw, the slight tremor in his hands as he gestured toward the charts and graphs spread across the conference table. I nodded, considering his words. A partnership could work, but it would require significant changes to Sterling's operations and corporate culture. "Are you prepared for that?" The question hung in the air, challenging them to confront the reality of their situation. I wasn't just talking about operational changes. I was talking about a fundamental shift in mindset from the traditional, hierarchical approach that had characterized Sterling to the more agile, innovative culture that had driven Nexus's success. The room fell silent. The unspoken question hanging in the air: were they prepared to cede control, to save the company? After a moment, the chairman spoke again. "We're prepared to consider all options that will ensure the long-term viability of Sterling and preserve as many jobs as possible." His response was carefully worded, acknowledging the necessity of change while still trying to maintain some semblance of control over the situation. And so began the negotiations, a complex dance of due diligence, valuation, and strategic planning that would last for 3 months. During that time, I had numerous meetings with the executive team, including Michael. The first time we sat across the table from each other as equals, I could see the conflict in his eyes. He was proud of his position, but also intimidated by what I had become. He had spent years looking down on me, dismissing my ambitions as childish fantasies. Now, I held the power to determine the future of the company he had dedicated his career to. I have to admit, "I never saw this coming," he said during a coffee break. His voice strained with the effort of maintaining composure. "When Mom told me about the Forbes article, I thought she was exaggerating." He stirred his coffee nervously, the spoon clinking against the porcelain mug with an irregular rhythm that betrayed his inner turmoil. "People change," I replied calmly, taking a sip of my coffee. I decided to stop drifting. The word drifting hung between us, a direct reference to our conversation all those years ago in our parents' kitchen. I hadn't brought it up to hurt him, but to acknowledge the journey that had brought us to this moment. He flinched at the word. Remembering our conversation from years ago in our parents' kitchen. "Look, about what I said that night, ... I was out of line." His apology was unexpected, and I could see that it cost him something to admit it. His pride had always been a defining characteristic, and to see him set it aside, even momentarily, was surprising. "It doesn't matter anymore," I said, though we both knew it did. Those words had been the catalyst for my transformation, the fuel that had propelled me forward when I wanted to give up. They mattered not because I held a grudge, but because they had shaped the trajectory of my life in ways I couldn't possibly imagine. The due diligence process was thorough, revealing both opportunities and challenges. Sterling's physical stores were strategically located in high-traffic areas, but many were underperforming due to outdated merchandising and poor customer service. Their supply chain was efficient but inflexible, unable to adapt quickly to changing consumer preferences. Their corporate culture was hierarchical and resistant to change, with layers of bureaucracy that stifled innovation. But beneath these challenges lay valuable assets, a brand name with recognition among older consumers, real estate holdings in prime locations, and a team of experienced employees who understood the retail business. With the right strategy and leadership, Sterling could be transformed into a modern retail enterprise that combined the best of physical and digital commerce. As the negotiations progressed, I found myself considering not just the business aspects of the acquisition, but also the personal implications. This was more than just a business deal. It was an opportunity to close a chapter of my life, to demonstrate in the most tangible way possible how wrong Michael had been about me. But I also found myself questioning my motives. Was this about business, or was it about revenge? And if it was about revenge, what form would that revenge take? Would I destroy Michael's career as he had once tried to destroy my confidence? Or would I take a different path, one that demonstrated not just my success, but my capacity for something greater? The acquisition was finalized on a Tuesday morning in early spring. The board of Sterling had accepted Nexus's offer of $800 million. It's a significant premium over their current market value, but a fraction of what the company had been worth just 5 years earlier. As the new owner of Sterling Enterprises, I had the authority to make changes to the executive team. The board had left those decisions entirely up to me. The signing ceremony was held in the same conference room where we had conducted our negotiations. As I signed the documents that transferred ownership of Sterling to Nexus, I felt a sense of closure, of completion. This wasn't just about business success. It was about fulfilling a promise I had made to myself years ago. I called a company-wide meeting for that Friday. The rumor mill had been working overtime, with employees speculating about massive layoffs and restructuring. As I stood at the podium in the auditorium, I could feel the tension in the room. I saw Michael sitting in the front row with other executives, his face pale, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. The auditorium was filled to capacity, with employees standing along the walls and spilling out into the hallway. The atmosphere was thick with anxiety, a palpable energy that seemed to press down on everyone in the room. "Thank you for coming today," I began, my voice steady despite the butterflies in my stomach. "As you know, Nexus has acquired Sterling Enterprises. There will be changes, but not necessarily the ones you're expecting." I paused, letting the silence hang in the air, giving my words time to sink in. The room was utterly still, every eye fixed on me, every ear tuned to my words. 25 years ago, I was told by someone very close to me that I was drifting through life with no purpose. I continued, my eyes briefly meeting Michael's. That person was wrong. I wasn't drifting, I was preparing. I was learning. I was deciding who I would become. As I spoke, I could see the ripple of recognition pass through the room. Some employees, particularly those who had been with Sterling for many years, knew the story of my relationship with Michael. Others were hearing it for the first time, but the universality of being underestimated resonated with everyone in the room. Success comes to those who decide with definiteness what they will achieve and then pay the price to get there. It doesn't come from luck or privilege or even talent. It comes from decision. I walked around the stage, feeling the power of my words, the certainty that had carried me through all those years of struggle. I looked out at the faces in the audience, some fearful, some curious, some resentful, and saw not just employees of a company I had acquired, but individuals with their own hopes, fears, and dreams. Some of you may be wondering about your jobs, about the future of this company. Here's what I can tell you. Sterling will not just survive, will thrive. But it will do so under new leadership, with new vision, and with a new understanding of what it means to be decisive in today's business world. I stopped directly in front of the executive row, my eyes scanning the faces of the people who had once represented everything I had been told I could never achieve, effective immediately. The following changes will be made to the executive team, I said, pulling out a sheet of paper. I read through a list of names, some of whom would be transitioning to new roles, others who would be leaving the company with generous severance packages. When I came to Michael's name, I paused. He looked up at me, his expression unreadably a mixture of fear, defiance, and perhaps even a glimmer of hope. Michael will be transitioning from his role as executive vice president to senior advisor, I announced. In this capacity, he will report directly to me and will be responsible for mentoring younger executives on the importance of adaptability and vision in changing times. A collective gasp went through the room. Everyone knew what this meant. Michael had been demoted, stripped of real authority, and placed in a position where he would be taking orders from the little brother he had dismissed so many years ago. After the meeting, as employees filed out of the auditorium, Michael approached me. His face was a mixture of anger, humiliation, and something else, maybe even respect. "You didn't have to do that in front of everyone," he said, his voice low, barely containing the emotions churning beneath the surface. "Yes, I did," I replied, meeting his gaze directly. "Not for revenge, but for principle. The same principle that got me here, definiteness. I wasn't being cruel. I was making a point not just to Michael, but to everyone in the company. Success requires definiteness, a willingness to make tough decisions and stand by them. The demotion wasn't personal. It was business, a necessary step in transforming Sterling's culture from one of complacency to one of innovation." He nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his eyes. "I see that now." His acknowledgement was genuine, a recognition that the principles I had followed were indeed the ones that had led to my success. "I'm not done, Michael," I continued, my voice softening slightly. "I want you to know that I'm not keeping you here to humiliate you. I'm keeping you here because despite our history, I believe you have valuable experience. But you need to learn what I learned 25 years ago, that success comes to those who decide, not those who drift." My words were not just a reprimand, but an invitation, an opportunity for him to learn and grow, to transform himself as I had transformed my own life, for the first time since we were children. I saw something like admiration in his eyes. "How did you do it?" he asked, his voice filled with genuine curiosity. "How did you go from that kid sleeping on a couch to ... this?" His question was not just about my business success, but about the personal transformation that had made it possible. "I made a decision," I said simply. "I decided who I was, what I would become, and what price I was willing to pay. Then I paid it every single day, without exception." My response was not meant to boast, but to explain, to share the principle that had guided my journey and that could guide his as well. If he chose to embrace it, in the months that followed, I watched Michael transform. The arrogance that had once defined him gave way to humility. The condescension was replaced by genuine curiosity. He began to embrace the principles of definiteness that I shared with the executive team. And eventually, he became one of my most trusted advisors. The change was not immediate or easy. There were moments of resistance, of old habits resurfacing, but over time, saw a genuine shift in his approach to business and to life. He began to ask questions rather than make assumptions, to listen more than he spoke, to consider possibilities rather than limitations. Our relationship healed, not through forgetting the past, but through acknowledging it and moving forward with mutual respect. We had long conversations about our childhood, about the dynamics that had shaped our relationship, about the insecurities that had driven his need to feel superior and my need to prove myself. These conversations were sometimes difficult, often emotional, but always necessary. They allowed us to understand each other not just as brothers, but as individuals shaped by different experiences and challenges. I learned that Michael's confidence had always been fragile, built on a foundation of external validation rather than internal certainty. His success at Sterling had given him status and respect, but it had never given him the deep sense of purpose that comes from knowing who you are and what you're meant to do. I spent my whole life trying to live up to expectations, Dads. The company societies, he told me one evening as we worked late in my office. I never stopped to ask what I actually wanted, what I was meant to do. I just followed the path that was laid out for me. His confession was vulnerable, honest, and it helped me understand the person behind the facade of confidence that had so intimidated me in my youth. And now, I asked, genuinely curious about his perspective. I see that there's more to success than climbing the corporate ladder, he said, a thoughtful expression on his face. You found something you were passionate about, something that gave your life meaning beyond just making money or impressing people. That's real success. His observation showed how far he had come, how much he had grown in his understanding of what truly matters in life and work. At a family dinner 5 years after the acquisition, Michael stood to make a toast. Our parents were there, along with our extended family, and the atmosphere was warm and relaxed, a stark contrast to the tense gatherings of our past. The dining room was filled with conversation and laughter, the air fragrant with the aroma of my mother's cooking. The dynamics had shifted over the years, with my success no longer a source of concern, but of pride, and Michael's humility earning him a new kind of respect from the family. To my brother, Michael said, raising his glass, his voice filled with genuine emotion. The man who taught me that drifting leads nowhere, but decisiveness leads everywhere. The man who showed me that the greatest revenge isn't destruction, but transformation. As our glasses clinked, I realized that my journey had come full circle. I had not only proven my doubters wrong, but I had turned one of them into an ally. I had not just built a successful company, I had built a new relationship with my brother, one based on respect rather than rivalry. Looking back on those 25 years, I can now see that every challenge, every rejection, every moment of doubt was necessary. They were the fires that forged my definiteness, the obstacles that strengthened my resolve, the darkness that made me appreciate the light. The lesson I learned is one that applies to everyone. Your life will not change because of chance. It will change because of choice. The moment you decide who you are, what you will become, what price you're willing to pay, everything begins to rearrange itself to match that decision. The world responds to definiteness. It honors those who declare, this is who I am, this is what I shall have, and this is the price I will pay. So I ask you, what decision have you been postponing? What dream have you been drifting away from? The day will come when you realize the cost of delay was your destiny. Don't let that day be tomorrow. Make your decision now. Declare it to yourself, to the universe, and to anyone who has ever doubted you. Then, and only then, will you begin the journey to your